Hello and welcome to this special panel discussion with a group of distinguished guests as South Korea plays host to the annual Apec leaders meeting in the historic city of Gyeongju this week. I'm Min San-hee. The theme of this year's main Apec meeting is Building a Sustainable Tomorrow, Connect, Innovate, Prosper. That being said, in this televised panel session, we link this year's APEC theme to the broader economy, energy and earth, if you will, for a thought-provoking discourse on the role and relevance of the Asia-Pacific economic cooperation, especially in light of the current geopolitical environment. Now, before we delve into the day's discussion, I would like to introduce our group of guests who have graciously made the time to be with us in person as well as online. First, then, I have Emeritus Professor Gyeongju of Business at Dongguk University, who was also the former president of the APEC Studies Association of Korea. Professor Che, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
I also have Professor Chung Seo-yong of International Studies at Korea University, who is also a renowned pundit on climate-related matters. Professor Chung, it's good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me here today.
Meanwhile, joining this panel session virtually is Mr. Henry Haggard, the former Director of Energy Resources at the U.S. State Department and the former Director for Europe at the U.S. National Security Council. Mr. Haggard, it's great to have you on.
Great to be here.
And finally, I have Dr. Dean Baker, a senior economist at the American think tank, the Center for Economic and Policy Research, which I understand you co-founded back in the year 1999. Dr. Baker, it's lovely to have you with us.
Thanks a lot for having me on.
Now, let's start the session here in the studio. Professor Che, what is the significance of South Korea's slogan for this year's APEC leaders meeting, Building a Sustainable Tomorrow?
Okay. Thank you very much for that question. The slogan, Building a Sustainable Tomorrow, carries both symbolic and practical meaning. It captures not only Korea's national vision, but also APEC's decade-long evolution. It started with the slogan with trade and investment, and also cooperation among member economies in 1989. And then it made the evolution to these days, and it captures inclusiveness and also growth together, and also green growth and so on. So in today's uncertain geopolitical climate, this slogan also calls for balance. And while tensions rise between major economies and between technology and security, Korea stands at a crossroads between members and also between those slogans. And Korea, our task is to forge what I call a balanced soft power at linking technology, culture, and trust to build bridges rather than walls. You can already see this philosophy in Gyeongju. As the ancient capital of Silla, it is not just a city of temples or tombs, but a living showcase of continuity. During APEC, we can see the city turns into the platform of the culture. The whole city is the platform of the culture. We can see the media show in Daewon royal tombs, and lively K-food and K-beauty festivals, and also in the show of Woljeongyo, we would see the K-fashion. It was amazing. So you can see those kind of festivals from the videos. And during those kind of events, those symbols, which symbols the harmony between the digital capacity and cultural creativity, and also heritage meeting innovation. In that sense, Korea's APEC slogan is not just rhetoric, it is a roadmap. It expresses our determination to lead regional discussions that unite economies around sustainability, inclusiveness, and innovation.
Right. Professor Chung, that is, if I were to ask you to identify perhaps one challenge then to building a sustainable tomorrow, what would you choose to highlight and why?
Well, as Professor Choi just listed a lot of good things that we can achieve through this theme. And then the question will be whether we can actually realize it. In other words, how to bridge the gaps between our ambition and the real implementation. So in case of the climate and environment and the sustainability area, companies and governments can say we have a highest level of the ambition to meet the net zero target. That's true. I do believe that they have that intention, but the reality is always different. So how to do it, that's the question. And then in that sense, in the context of APEC, therefore, APEC is very important. Why? We can build a cooperation so that we can address those gaps together. So in the sense that even if we have a big challenge, I think through the APEC, we can address many of them.
Right, and that being said then, Dr. Baker, as an economic expert, what do you believe is the role and relevance of this year's APEC leaders meeting here in the South Korean city of Gyeongju?
Well, I think it's taken on great importance in large part because President Trump has basically shaken up the world economic order with his trade policy, tariff policy. And this gave an opportunity for many of the nations that he's radically altered relations with, obviously South Korea being one, Japan being another, and of course China. It gave them a chance to negotiate on that. So this was a great opportunity, whether the outcome of those negotiations proves to be fruitful or not, that remains to be seen, but it did create a venue in which they could work through, or at least try to work through a trade agreement. So I see it as enormously important. Again, we'll have to see what the results are, say 6 months, a year, maybe 2 years down the road.
Mr. Haggard, you completed a distinguished 25-year career in the U.S. Foreign Service. How do you respond to concerns that the current administration is pulling the U.S. away from its leadership role on the global stage, keeping in mind that Mr. Trump has decided to skip this year's APEC leaders meeting?
Great question. I think I would actually split those two phrases apart. The fact that President Trump is not attending the leaders meeting, I don't see as particularly significant or any radical change in the U.S. approach. Over the years, there have been presidents who have sent a vice president or not gone to APEC leaders meetings. So, and the leadership that the United States is playing is with Trump, but also I would suggest previously is based on bilateral engagement and personal engagement. So APEC and multilateral fora have not generally been, or historically, and particularly with Trump, been the center of how America leads globally. That's, again, a much bigger topic to discuss, should that be the case or not. But as far as American leadership, it's really fundamentally based on bilateral and personal engagement in the era of Trump, and the APEC summit having offered, as Dr. Baker mentioned, offered a forum for the Xi-Trump meeting, offered a forum for a Lee-Trump meeting. So to me, this is a very successful summit, and it's really, I think, pretty standard approach for the U.S. president.
You're right. Quite a number of pundits have spoken about how South Korea has provided global leaders with a platform for engagement this time around. Professor Che, earlier on, you spoke about the importance of how South Korea should be seeking a strategy of balanced soft power. Keeping that in mind, in what other ways could South Korea perhaps expand its presence on the international stage?
Okay. With the uncertainties around U.S. leadership on the global stage, South Korea is uniquely positioned to play a stabilizing and also constructing some roles within APEC, especially this year, acting as a bridge builder that strengthens regional cooperation and keeps multilateralism alive. So drawing on a geopolitical location, its capacity to technological innovation and its reputation for diplomatic balance, Korea can sustain APEC's momentum by advancing inclusive digital transformation and also sustainable economic growth. And in this way, the leadership, such as in green technology, supply chain resilience, and people-to-people exchange help maintain integration in the region while countering protectionism and also fragmentation. So this approach would not replace U.S. leadership, but it complements it. And also, we can see this approach will strengthen the balanced soft power. Professor Joseph Nye said that soft power is the ability to shape outcomes through attraction, not coercion. So Korea can do the three roles. So the initiator, broker, and also the driver. The initiator, who will form some kind of agenda, and also broker will make the dialogue among the member economies, and also driver. As a driver, Korea will execute all the projects and also supports those kind of activities in APEC boundaries. So this kind of spirit is vividly displayed on October 29th when BTS leader RM delivered the keynote address at the CEO summit, APEC CEO summit. He spoke not as an entertainer. He spoke as a creator and also entrepreneur. I'm sorry. He spoke not as an entertainer, and he spoke as a creator and cultural leader, highlighting how empathy and also imagination can coexist with innovation and enterprise. It was a defining moment, K-culture evolving from cultural emotion into an economic and political conversation. So rather than filling a vacuum, Korea's role within APEC is to keep the region connected through technology, trust, and shared philosophy.
Right, that being the case for South Korea then. Professor Chung, with regard to observations by some pundits that the US is opening up the stage for other players to take perhaps a leading role, with regard to climate, China is believed to be seeking, that is, to fill the vacuum left by Mr. Trump as he withdrew Washington from the Paris Agreement for the second time earlier this year. Could you tell us a bit more about China's strategy and also about the actions taken by South Korea in recent times to tackle climate change?
Sure. It's irony that it has been both China and the United States which have made the Paris Agreement actually possible in the year 2015 when we had a lot of challenges, whether or not we have a lot of challenges and questions, whether or not we could have that. But because of these two leadership, now we only have, in that sense, the one leadership left. And that actually, it gave a lot more open opportunities to China. China, as we may know, that it recently initiated a global governance initiative. And then under that, China committed to make more contributions to climate track by strengthening the South and South cooperation. And then in recent, coming the Brazil COP meeting, we expect that Chinese leadership will open up another big agenda that will largely benefit mainly for the majority of the developing countries. So in the end, then I think that President Trump may have good reasons why he decided to do so. But overall, as the global leader, ironically, it opened more opportunities once again for China, and China is taking over it. So that's the thing that we have to understand. And then in response to this changing situation, I think Republic of Korea, especially under this new President Lee Jae-myung, I think South Korea is preparing for taking up a lot more opportunities by contributing to building the bridges between the developed and developing countries in the areas of strengthened cooperation in the Pacific region, and then strengthening its own domestic policy. Also, we are looking at other issues. Maybe APEC is the great chance for government of the Republic of Korea to share some of the initial plans that it has made for several months after this new administration take up. I do hope that even South Korea can find a bridging role between China and the United States again to tackle climate change.
Right. And with regard to APEC, Mr. Haggard, based on your experience shaping U.S. international energy policy, what role can forums like the APEC play to steer Indo-Pacific economies to cleaner pathways, if you will?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a real role here. And I think that first, though, is to shift away from an emphasis on cleaning the energy area and focusing instead on availability and access. Because while climate change goals are central and important, and while European and advanced economies like Japan, Korea, and the US are focused on a transition and focused on how they can benefit, their economies and clean up their environment, the reality is most of the APEC economies are looking at growth first, and they're looking at a rising demand, a doubling of energy demand over the next decade, and they're looking at how they can supply and can supply growth for their country. So I think that APEC can play a role working on energy abundance, energy availability, and energy access as the main focus, and in that can shift the focus on solar and wind and other clean technologies on more on a profit-based basis. So what I mean by that is it won't be able, you can't form the bridge that Dr. Chung was talking about between developed and developing countries until you can show that there's a profit to be made, until you can show that the access will be advanced. If we just talk about cleaning up the energy pathway at APEC or otherwise, what we've seen in the past years is the progress slows. And with this U.S. administration, that will only be exacerbated. So I think there's a real opportunity for South Korea to look at energy availability, abundance, innovation, and through these types of coordination mechanisms at APEC, really make some significant progress on cleaning up the climate.
Right. Dr. Bakers, APEC agreements are non-binding commitments, and thus some critics believe that the forum is purely symbolic and that it lacks perhaps practical substance. What is your response, Dr. Baker?
Well, even binding agreements often turn out not to be as binding as we thought. And, I'll pick on the United States here as an obvious example. We have President Trump that seems to have violated many of our trade agreements, certainly with Canada, with South Korea, with many other countries in the world, we don't have an international enforcement mechanism as a practical matter. So I don't make a big difference between something being binding and not binding. You have to hope for some goodwill. Most countries generally have tried to adhere to agreements, whether they were binding officially or not binding. And I think that's the best we could really hope for. So whether it's ostensibly binding, I don't put a lot of emphasis on that. I think the big thing is work to an agreement. And again, you have to hope that countries will adhere to the commitments they make, whether it's ostensibly legally binding or not, because what happens if a country doesn't is other countries will no longer deal with them. I think it's unfortunate. I think the United States is likely to be in that situation, if it's not already, certainly 6 months, a year down the road. I mean, I think that's very unfortunate. But a country, basically, you have to rely on the good faith of its leadership. And obviously, leaders change, but you have to rely on a continuity that leaders respect what prior leaders had committed the country to. And where you have a situation where leaders don't do that, it doesn't matter whether they say it's binding or not, because it really depends on their goodwill.
You're right, definitely something to think about then. Professor Che, moving forward, the main areas for policy discussion at this year's APEC leaders meeting in the city of Gyeongju are digital transformation, including AI, and demographic transition. First then, with regard to digital transformation, why is it important, and how can APEC work to make it inclusive, as you've been highlighting earlier?
It is an excellent question. Yes, digital transformation is not just about the technology, it is about the people. The AI and also digital transformation will define who we are and how we can work, and also how we can connect in the area of the rapid change. This real challenge for APEC is to ensure that digitalization becomes inclusive, not divisive. So Korea's own experience will help in this sense. Korea, through our digital platform government and also AI ethics charter, we've already learned how to combine technology and also the fairness. So these efforts will align closely with APEC's Digital Economy Steering Group, which is working to bridge the digital divide across the region. And in fact, the need to inclusive digital transformation becomes even clearer when we look at the demographic trend these days, which will shape our future. So as highlighted in a recent Forbes analysis, 2/3 of the whole population in the global sense now lives in the countries with below replacement fertility, which means aging societies and shrinking workforce, and also the slower growth as a whole. Simply put, digital transformation is no longer optional. It is kind of the must and also essential for maintaining productivity and also sustaining prosperity. AI, automation, lifelong learning will be the key tools that allow economies to do more with less people, and also it will empower older generation to stay active and connected to the world. Inclusiveness, therefore, must go beyond access to technology. It means expanding opportunities for the women, small and medium-sized entrepreneurs, and also the youth. And in this sense, these ideas are not just theoretical, it is very practical. So these days, I believe at this moment or today, the summit, they will discuss about the final declaration about APEC, and it will be it is expected that in Gyeongju declaration, this digital inclusiveness will be reflected in the final declaration, I think. And early drafts indicate that AI cooperation and also demographic transition strategies would be reflected in the declaration. Within this framework, the spirit of the innovation and inclusion for sustainable growth will naturally be woven into this final declaration. So in this sense, how digital transformation will help us will build the truly sustainable tomorrow.
Right. We're, of course, talking about the Gyeongju Declaration.
Right.
Professor Chung, you recently partook in a panel discussion on a Chinese media network, and you underscored the importance of trust and transparency to advancing collective action against universal challenges. Do these elements, the elements of trust and transparency, exist within the APEC framework?
Yeah. By the way, I'm very impressed that even though you are covering my interview, even appearing on other countries' news media. Thank you very much, by the way. Yeah, I mean, trust and transparency, these are very important. The reason why you earlier asked to Dr. Baker about the nature of the APEC as a soft institution, not have a legally binding, character. So the APEC is open, and it's open to everybody, and then you can join. We don't necessarily go into the legally binding discussions, even if Dr. Baker said that there might be no difference, almost legally binding one, but still APEC gives a lot of the flexibility. In that sense, still, as I said, emphasized earlier, implementation is important. How to do it? We don't necessarily bind ourselves, and how can you do it? Unless we trust each other, actually we cannot achieve it. So in the sense that the trust is the basis actually for APEC, possibly to have a more effective implementation compared to other regional or international institutions which may not have been established based on the trust. And also, in order to have a trust to be going further, then we need to have transparency, meaning sharing the information and then assessing to see how the progress has been made. This will facilitate actually related stakeholders to trust each other more. We might see some progress, sometimes not, but in the end, trust and transparency, these are the main elements that will ensure the effective implementation of the APEC, even if it has a soft nature.
Right, especially if you're looking for collective action against certain challenges that faces the international community, of course. Mr. Haggard, that being said, with regard to artificial intelligence, the big question in the world as we speak appears to be to regulate or not to regulate AI. Now, speaking within your capacity as a former member of the US State Department, where do you stand on this matter, Mr. Haggard?
It's a great question. I mean, there's so much potential for both benefit and harm. I think it's essential that we look to create international norms and regulations. The question is where. APEC is not the venue. The UN will not provide a venue. I think it will have to be built, like Dr. Chung was talking about, the trust that we're discussing here. I think it has to start at a bilateral level and then build out from there, so that leading countries that are leading in AI, once they adopt policies and regulations and governance, then that can naturally spread through business channels as well as government channels. Korea is well placed to play a leadership role, similar to what Dr. Che was talking about, how there's this leadership role that Korea can play within APEC and more generally. On AI particularly, Korea hosted an AI safety summit in 2024. They put into place some early legislation on AI governance and safety back in last December. So Korea is because they see such potential, because there's such a technologically advanced economy, there's real benefit for them to play this leading role in this space. So that's the long version of it. The short version is, yes, there should be some governance and regulation. I think that, and ultimately, it's going to be built off of cooperation and trust, like we've been talking about. So, and what I would like to see is Korea and the United States to start working together to cooperate more, have a better environment for investment both ways, information sharing both ways. Through that, there can be a shared leadership that can, build out through venues like APEC and otherwise to help expand adoption of a safer set of guidelines, if not rules. Ultimately, with Russia and China playing a spoiler role in geopolitics, with Russia trying to change the norms of the international order, I would suggest. I think it's quite difficult to see an actual regulatory framework or internationally accepted governance structure put into place in coming years.
Right. I suppose we'll have to wait and see then. Meanwhile, Dr. Baker, with regard to demographic transition, this change appears to be the case for most nations worldwide, but of course more pronounced here in South Korea, the host of this year's APEC gathering, as the country has the world's lowest birth rate and a very quickly aging society. What, Dr. Baker, are the economic implications of this dire reality for South Korea, and what do you recommend to address it?
Well, clearly this does raise issues of labor supply that many countries, including the United States, Korea, many other countries have been seeing. And it's just a reality. We're seeing lower birth rates everywhere, and I realize South Korea is lower than the U.S., lower than other countries. But it's important to keep this in context. If we look at productivity growth, differences in productivity growth swamp anything that happens in terms of birth rates, in terms of demographics. So if you could raise productivity growth by 1 percentage point, 1.5 percentage points a year, 2.5 percentage points productivity growth over 25 years doubles your level of output per person. So there's a lot of room for offsetting demographic factors with increased productivity. And I'll confess, I don't know enough about Korea's current economic situation. I know you've had weak productivity growth the last couple of years. I don't know the reason for that, but certainly Korea's had very good productivity growth in prior decades. And with the opportunities opened up by AI and other technologies, I can't imagine why I wouldn't be able to get back to a healthy pace of productivity growth. In terms of the labor force issues, there's several points to be made here. One is getting more women into the labor force. Korea has been doing that, but your labor force participation of women is still below Sweden and other countries. Having it be more friendly to women, daycare, other factors make it a more flexible workplace. That helps to offset the demographics. Also, getting older people in the workforce. I mean, many countries have raised their retirement age. The U.S. has done for its Social Security program, but also just making it easier for older people to work, to have increased work from home. Again, over 20% of the work days in the U.S. are now remote. That's a great thing in my view. A lot of older people will opt to stay in the labor force if they can work remotely, particularly at part-time, when they have time available. Make that a possibility. Lastly, immigration. Again, that's obviously a huge issue. It's a huge issue in the U.S. It's an issue everywhere. But allowing for controlled immigration, again, it gets to be an absurd situation. No one anywhere is calling for unlimited immigration. The other extreme, no immigration, to my view, crazy, but that can go a long way towards relieving labor shortages. The last thing, just, again, should be an obvious point. Apart from the economics, we should make it possible for people to have kids who want to have kids. Not because we need a larger labor force. Again, even if everyone goes out and have a kid today, they're not in the labor force for 25 years. But it's part of life. People want to have kids, should be able to have kids, and we have to make sure that they have access to childcare and other things that parents need and their kids need. So I'd say I don't see it as a crisis, but again, it's a problem, and countries have to deal with it.
Right, and it's also being addressed here at the APEC leaders meeting in the city of Gyeongju, of course. Professor Che, beyond APEC's official agenda, its platform, its purpose, that is a platform for bilateral engagement among global leaders, has also been acknowledged, which was earlier acknowledged by Dr. Baker and Mr. Haggard as well. What are some of the sideline summits, Professor Che, that caught your attention?
That's an excellent question. The Gyeongju APEC Summit this year truly lived up to its name as a super week of diplomacy. And while the headlines focused on the main leaders' session, some of the most tangible outcomes came from the sideline summits. And those bilateral and small group meetings held alongside the formal agenda. And 3 points are catching my attention. First, as the host country, South Korea skillfully used the platform to deepen key alliances with the United States and Japan. At the US and Korean summit, the two nations signed the Technology Prosperity Deal, TPD, not just as a political statement, but as a practical framework for cooperation in frontier technologies such as AI, quantum, and space. The summit also was the political catalyst for the tariff agreement. And it marked the shift of the alliance toward the true economic security partnership between those two economies. Meanwhile, Korea-Japan summit between President Lee and Prime Minister Takaishi served to stabilize the Northeast Asian dynamic. Both sides reaffirmed that the intent to keep dialogue moving forward, a meaningful signal of regional stability and also the maturity despite the lingering historical background. Second point would be the US-China summit, which captures the most of the attention from all over the world. Amid the fears of the renewed trade war, the two leaders instead reached a one-year tariff truce. The Washington will cut average tariff from 57% to 40%, so 10% points cut in their tariff imposition on Chinese goods. And in return, China will hold its export controls for 1 year, and those kind of lifting the export controls on critical minerals would be the limited but meaningful steps toward the stabilization of the global supply chain. Although there is still some kind of deep rivalries behind. And also the third point, I would highlight the quiet but strategically important meetings with Canada and New Zealand. Those kind of the mini multilateralism through bilateralism will also form those kind of diplomacy globally. And especially Korea and the New Zealand agreed to elevate their ties to a comprehensive strategic partnership, and Wellington expressed its intent to join Korea's critical minerals security partnership. Such agreement may sound technical, but they are vital to build resilient supply chains instead of resulting to only one region. So let me summarize. APEC 2025 was less about one grand declaration, but more about the parts, the summation of the parts of those kind of small and maybe very practical talk. And in this way, the week of the concentrated diplomacy and temporarily eased the global trade tensions and strengthened the strategic network and repositioning of the Korea. Those are some kind of symbols of the Korea toward the APEC and also to the global level.
Right, and keeping in mind what Professor Che said, Professor Chung, I'd like to extend the same question to you. Which bilateral exchange grabbed your attention?
Well, by the way, that's the most difficult question because already Professor Cho addressed most of the important points, but still I'd like to maybe add some of the more points to what Professor Choi nicely narrated. So bilateral, as Mr. Haggard mentioned, I think he made a good points that along the sideline we can have summit meetings. Even we see the participation of a lot of global business leaders. We haven't talked about it actually today. So actually it generates a lot more benefits to all. Right? It's not only about the governments, it's all for all. That's why APEC has an openness, as I described about. In the sense, looking at what Korea has been doing, we have been working together with some of the key partner countries, right? China, United States, Japan, also in Indo-Pacific, I think Australia can be a very important partner for us. And I know that President Lee has a lot of good meetings and interactions with the leaders from the ASEAN. And then along with New Zealand, we can form a minilateral regional Indo-Pacific group, even to talk about the climate change. And Mr. Haggard and then Mr. Baker, Dr. Baker said that energy is the key based on technology. Right, and then in regard to Australia, for instance, there has been a lot of the discussions on the cooperation on hydrogen, for instance, and the possibly renewables and the critical minerals always coming. So in that sense, that Korea through the APEC actually has maximized its middle power role in facilitating all these good things in a situation where, for the time being, I believe the United States created a vacuum, but that's fine. We can fill the vacuum up through this, minilateral interactions among each other.
Right, and going back to the multilateral meeting under the APEC framework, Mr. Haggard, what do you suppose would the success of this year's Summit of Leaders under the APEC framework depend on?
So sorry, my answer goes along with my colleagues talking with the success of APEC relies on how the leaders interact bilaterally and in multilateral fashion, how business leaders interact. And so I think that APEC is as successful as the interactions on the sidelines. So obviously I focused on the President of the United States' interactions, but I agree with my colleagues who spoke earlier that it's these other connections, Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands, Northeast Asia, China. This is all both on the energy side, and as well as diplomatically. To tackle questions such as energy demand, energy access, this will need everyone to work together. The amount of capital that we needed, whether it's on hydrogen or even on more traditional energy sources, the amount of infrastructure investment that will be needed will require support and coordination. And a forum like APEC, both under the aegis of APEC as well as through these minilateral and bilateral interactions, can make a real impact. But I think anytime you talk about APEC success, you should always look at that frame from how does the host present itself. And I think there's a real opportunity at this APEC summit for Korea to move from its very successful, very technologically advanced, export-driven economy to moving into a more global economy that is actually has investment from outside. And I think that's already starting with companies like Coupang and GM have traditionally American companies have had big investments in the United States, Chevron, others. But I think the next phase of a modernized Korean economy is there's a playing field here in Korea that is more modern with less labor inflexibility, fewer non-tariff barriers, less irregular enforcement of some of the regulations around taxes and customs and otherwise, that then Korea becomes globalized through investment into Korea. So I think that the success of Korea, of APEC, should be assessed by the success of the host country taking the opportunity of this global moment to become even more of an advanced economy. And Korea is well positioned to do that, whether it's in civil nuclear or its digital economy or otherwise.
Mr. Hager, this is an impromptu question, but our panelists here in the studio spoke about how, with regard to bilateral engagements, their attention was focused on that between President Trump and his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping. What were your takeaways from that summit, which lasted about 100 minutes? What were your immediate thoughts afterwards?
I think in summitry, almost always the key is that it happens and nothing bad happens. It's rare that a summit has a big deliverable or a big deliverable that has lasting impact. As I believe Professor Che talked about, there was a détente achieved, a reduction in some of the tariffs, but really that the important part, that was going to happen if they met. So it's not a dramatic shift in what's going on. We'll see what happens. Will China buy soybeans? Will there be any change in the fentanyl policies? I'm a bit dubious, but that doesn't detract from the fact that this was successful. To have real change in the relationship, it's not done in one meeting. What this meeting succeeded in doing is not moving backwards. So again, there were marginal advances, at least in principle. How they are implemented will take time, and that will be and will need to be done again. So hopefully there'll be a meeting in April they talked about, perhaps next year, where Trump perhaps will travel to China and Xi would travel to the United States. That's essential to keep the momentum moving. So not blown away by any of the rhetoric. I'm waiting for how the implementation goes and whether this can be maintained to allow for continued conversation and engagement.
Dr. Baker, this is also an impromptu question. Speaking as an economic expert, do you believe the summit between Beijing and Washington is perhaps enough to calm fears in the international trade environment?
I don't think anything at this point can totally, offset the fears that have been raised. I mean, obviously, President Trump has kind of thrown everything off the table. It is at least temporary stabilization. I mean, a lot of people were joking that we're basically back to where we were before President Trump started the trade war. What we saw on the table with China withholding rare earth materials, that would be very bad news for the United States and really much of the world. The United States countering with tariffs of over 100%. I actually think that's much more of a threat to the United States than to China, because that's like a near embargo on imports from China, which would really disrupt the U.S. economy, I think, in a big way. So to see that rolled back was certainly a positive story. Where that leaves the two countries going forward, as Mr. Haggard said, it's very hard to say. I mean, I think everyone should be happy that for the moment, at least, considered a ceasefire, that we have a truce and we'll see how long that lasts. So that's definitely a positive outcome, but the longer term story remains to be seen.
And speaking about bilateral summits, Professor Chung, on Thursday, that is yesterday, President Lee Jae-myung began his sideline summits with talks with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney and ended the day with summit talks with the newly elected Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. Do you believe that ties between South Korea and Japan will remain on a positive track moving forward?
I think we saw it yesterday. And then I think on the Japanese side, they indicated that actually we want to continue, have a sort of the good relations with Republic of Korea because they will serve the best interest for not only for Japan, but for the entire Apec reasons. And I saw that. I'm sure that all the audience on TV now will agree with me on this.
Right, and hopefully you are right, of course. Dr. Baker, next year's APEC leaders meeting will be hosted by China. What should we be keeping our eyes on as we wait for that event?
Well, we have a lot of trade deals, certainly that the United States has made with bilateral trade deals with China, South Korea, and Japan. I think the real question is how do those hold up over the next year? Obviously, President Trump actually takes pride in being unpredictable. So we have agreements at least somewhat in place. None of these are all that well pinned down. So some of it, none of us, at least for me, I'm not sure what's in any of these deals, not for lack of trying. I just, you can't find that. So I think the real question is the extent to which these deals are more or less binding. Nothing's going to be 100%, but do we know what the tariffs will be on most items between the U.S. and China, U.S. and South Korea, U.S. and Japan? I think that's the biggest question. I mean, I'm obviously I'm in the United States, I'm U.S. centric, but that we're the most unpredictable element at this point. So the question is, how much do these hold over the next year? And it's a very different world if we have these deals at least somewhat in place right now. If those deals are still in place a year from now, or everything's again up for grabs, I think most of us would hope they're in place. I mean, one of the interesting things, we don't like to learn this way, but one of the things I think many of us have learned or better appreciate of Trump's tariffs is tariffs themselves are not that harmful. So we have a tariff 15% now with most items with South Korea. South Korea could live with that. We could live with that. It would be better over zero, but if it's 15%, the key thing is that it's stable, that there's certainty. Then businesses could plan. We don't have things changing all the time. I don't count on that, but if there's some stability in these agreements, that would be a very, very good thing and put us well situated for next year.
Dr. Baker, I'm going to use a very old cliche, as they say, the devil is in the details with regard to deals, right?
Exactly. And again, I don't know if anyone knows the details. I'm not sure if the people taking part in them know the details.
Right. Well, I'm afraid we'll have to end it there then. Dr. Baker, thank you so much for your insights today. Mr. Haga, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Professor Chair of the studio, thank you very much for your insights. And Professor Chung, thank you for your time and thoughts.
Thank you.
Right, that brings us to the end of this special APEC panel session. I am Min Sun-hee. Thank you for watching.